Schmierer, okay. That's not how I would have pronounced it, so thank you. Thomas Schmierer has come all the way from Riverside, and he's a therapist that integrates his Christian faith in his counseling, and he counsels on a wide variety of subjects. Many of us, well, raise your hand if you don't ever deal with issues. We all deal with issues, and he is a therapist that incorporates the Christian faith and his Catholic faith in his therapy. And so we'd like to invite him up now. So thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me. I feel like I'm in grad school again. There's not too many male therapists. Almost all women. All right. An article published by the National Catholic Register on October 2nd, 2013 states that 28% of Catholic marriages end in divorce. That's about 10% lower than the rate among Protestants. So while we might feel proud as Catholics to have a 10% lower divorce rate than Protestants, we may want to keep in mind that just because more Catholics stay married, that doesn't mean that those marriages are actually happy ones. I'd like those of you who are married to take a moment to ask yourself, am I happy in my marriage? And if your answer is that you are not as happy as you could be, then this talk is for you. Others of you may be divorced, and you might be wondering what went wrong. And even if your ex is clearly to blame for the divorce, you might still ask yourself, what could I have done better? Maybe you want to marry again someday, but before you do that, you maybe want to improve the way you behave when you get into a serious romantic relationship. So if this describes you, then this talk is for you too. Some of you might be parents of one or more hostile, rebellious teenagers, and you might be confused about how to deal with your teen child or children. If so, then this talk is for you too. Maybe some of you have never been married, but maybe you're in an exclusive romantic relationship that can be rocky at times. If so, then I think this talk can help you too. But even if you're completely satisfied with your relationships, I think this talk might have something to offer you, because it can give you some language and or concepts to describe what you're doing right, and thus confirming that you're seeing yourself clearly as a relationship master. So, even though I've entitled this talk, How to Master Your Significant Relationships, I think that the information I'm going to present to you can help you to improve your less significant relationships too. I'm mainly going to focus on marital relationships in this talk, but what I'm going to explain here can be applied to any significant relationship. And as was told you earlier, I am a Catholic therapist. I'm in private practice in Riverside, and each of you has my business card. So if you don't, just get a hold of me after, I can give it to you. So if you like what you hear today and want to set up a session to continue to work on improving your significant relationships, please don't hesitate to give me a call. As a Catholic marriage and family therapist, I take my faith seriously. So seriously that I earned a master's in moral theology from a solid Catholic college. It was through a distance learning program. At the same time, I was in school to get my master's in marriage and family therapy. And that's because I didn't want the secular psychological nonsense that they were teaching me to get in the way of my faith. I wanted to integrate the faith and good psychology. And even though I often help Catholics deal with matters of faith and morals, I try to integrate the our faith with the best evidence-based therapies. So all of the information in this talk comes from an evidence-based therapy called Sound Relationship House. It's also known as the Gottman method. I don't want to take credit for what I'm giving you, so I don't want you to think these are my ideas. So I'm going to tell you up front what my resources are. And mainly, a lot of resources from Dr. John Gottman. For example, his 2011 book, The Science of Trust. I've listened to a recording as a keynote speaker. I've gotten a hold of one of his PowerPoint presentations. I've watched his YouTube videos, and I have this little kit that it's called the Art of Science and Love Home Workshop DVD. And then a lot of what this talk is based on, I got from a website called marleneandbob.com. That's the URL. And it's Bob and Marlene Neufeld and Marianne Carmichael have the copyright to the information. And they based it on John Gottman's book from 1994 called Why Marriages Succeed or Fail. So you can see on your handouts that I have here that the talk is structured into 3 subtopics, and I'm using the mnemonic T44 to help you kind of retain what I'm going over here today. The T stands for timeouts. The first 4 stands for the 4 horsemen. And the second 4 stands for the 4 antidotes. Regarding timeouts, the main thing I'm going to stress is that taking more timeouts should be the first change you make in your important relationships. The first 4, the 4 horsemen, stands for the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and I'll be going, those are the 4 bad behaviors. I'll be going over those. Relationship damaging behaviors. And then the second 4, the 4 antidotes, these are the 4 opposing behaviors to those 4 damaging behaviors. And those behaviors can improve your relationship. So about timeouts. I want to tell you a little bit about Dr. John Gottman. He's arguably the best marriage and family therapy researcher in the world. He's been doing it for at least 20 years. And he received a government grant. He's up in a beautiful island off the coast of Seattle called Orcas Island. And he received a government grant to have couples come to his bed and breakfast. And they go to what he calls the Love Lab. And he has all these ways of, he and his partner at the beginning of the research had all these ways of measuring physiological responses of the couples as they communicate. And they even created something called the jiggleometer. Because, the husbands would sit there looking stone cold, with their arms crossed, they look like they're not moving, right? But he had a platform underneath the chair with a spring on it. And if they're wiggling their foot or anything, he would pick up the jiggles. So he measured a lot of stuff. And what he discovered is that certain physiological indicators precede or accompany relationship-damaging behaviors. He calls the process diffuse physiological arousal, or in simple, normal, everyday language, emotional flooding, getting flooded. So what happens when you get flooded? A lot of stuff I'm not going to go over at all. But one thing is, we all know this, you get the adrenaline hit, right? And a series of changes happen in the body. One of them is that your heart rate goes over 100 beats per minute. And your blood oxygen concentration goes below 95%. And with that little low amount of oxygen going to the brain, you're not thinking clearly, and you don't have enough oxygen to be compassionate and other-oriented. So there's no good reason to continue trying to work things out and keep talking. Some couples stay up all night trying to figure out a problem, right? It's some problem they could have probably figured out in 10 minutes some other time. Once you get flooded, forget it. It's not going to work. So Dr. Gottman advises his couples to take timeouts when they get flooded. It takes about 20 minutes to clear the physiological changes if you do something soothing. So if you came back 20 minutes later, you do a lot better. So Dr. Gottman has his couples, when they communicate, he has them wear something called a fingertip oximeter. And he recommends that therapists do that, and so I do that too. And I just want to show you what this thing is. It's a cool little device. It's like the same thing you would wear in the hospital, except for the screen is right here on the device. And that's the alarm that goes off if you go outside of the range. So if it misreads for the first minute, so it's not like I'm flooded right now. And so you can see the big numbers, the heart, the blood oxygen concentration. So after about a minute, this would go up to about 98 or something like that. And then the little number is the heart rate. So I'm going to take it off now. So you heard the beep, right? If that beep goes off when I'm doing therapy, we stop talking. Even with the therapist there, the conversation's not going to go well. The other person's not going to feel understood because your brain can't grasp. It's very difficult to really care about someone else. You get really selfish once this little device goes off. And so what we do is we practice relaxation techniques and stuff for about 20 minutes until the physiological changes.
It'd be a great Valentine's gift for me.
Yeah.
Not for us.
Right. We might give you the same gift back, right?
Yeah.
But here in this room, we can bash the men. It's okay. So I just want to stress the point that being flooded means you're self-centered. The other person's not going to feel understood, and timeouts help out. You can do different kinds of meditation techniques, and that's it for timeouts.
What was that device called? Somebody said.
So it's called a fingertip oximeter, OXI meter. And if you're going to get one, you go to facelake.com. That's where this one's from.
Facelake?
Yeah, Facelake, like my face. Yeah. And the model's CMS50E. That's a good model. And sometimes these things help because if it doesn't go off, then you know, hey, they're not flooded. I find that reassuring. I don't mean as a therapist, I mean as when you're doing relational talk. Yeah. So now on to the 4 Horsemen. So Dr. Gottman was able to predict divorce with 94% accuracy in a 1992 study.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's pretty good at predicting when the divorce will happen, too. How many years, etc.
Really? From the beginning of the relationship?
From the beginning. Yeah.
Give it a life.
Yeah, because he has a lot of data connected with the behaviors. And so he noticed these 4 behaviors that predict divorce and or miserable relationships, like staying married and being miserable. And he divided the study participants into 2 groups based on their use of these behaviors, the masters and the disasters. And the masters stayed married and were happy. The disasters either ended up predictably headed towards divorce or they're in a miserable marriage. And so he calls these relationship damaging behaviors of the disasters the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And think is pretty cool. You know, I think he's an ethnic Jew, but he has all these Christian references, you know, biblical references. And this is on your handouts, you know, the 4 horsemen. It's criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. And I'm going to go over these briefly. So, criticism. That's attacking your partner's personality or character, usually with the intent of making someone right and someone wrong. You'll use generalizations here, like you always do this or you never do that. And one problem with saying you always or you never, for example with you always, what does that bring to mind to the other person? But, you know, well, I remember 10 years ago, there's that one time I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And so that's where the escalation begins. Better to say something like, last Thursday, you did this. Even if they've done it 100 times in the last month, just to pick one. Another generalization, you're the type of person who or why are you so? Defensiveness. That's seeing yourself as the victim, warding off a perceived attack, making excuses. For example, external circumstances beyond your force controlled you to act in a certain way. You might say, it's not my fault, or I didn't, you know. Example of that is, you know, husband comes home late from work, right? And you say, I'm angry, you're late again. And, oh, some external circumstances. This is why it happened. I mean, my boss said I had to stay. You know, what am I supposed to do? That's defensiveness. So make sure you go home and tell them that. Also, cross-complaining. That's meeting your spouse's complaint or criticism with a complaint of your own, and then ignoring what your partner said. Then there's disagreeing and then cross-complaining. That's not true, comma, you're the one who. Or I did this because you did that. Another example is yes-butting. So you start off agreeing, but then disagree. And that one's really common. Repeating yourself without paying attention to what the other person is saying. And then another one, whining, it's not fair. So the idea is, sometimes, you know, in response to a complaint, we want to say it's not fair. The idea is, if you don't want it to escalate, keep that to yourself, right? It's the opening your mouth and saying it is kind of the problem. And now for contempt, that's attacking your partner's sense of self with the intention to insult or psychologically abuse him or her. Now, contempt, I want to say that out of the 4 horsemen, this is the only one that the masters don't do. Okay, the masters do the other 3. It's just they come and make up for it after, you know, and they do it less often. But contempt, if there's contempt in your serious, significant relationship, you need to get help and get help fast, I think. And these are insults and name-calling. So we have some 4-letter words. For women, a lot of times it's a 5-letter word. And, but also wimp, fat, stupid, ugly, slob, lazy, these kinds of labels. Hostile humor, sarcasm, or mockery. Like you say, you know, why didn't you pick up your clothes? And why didn't you pick up your clothes? Right, that would be mockery. Body language and tone of voice, sneering, rolling your eyes, curling your upper lip. So if you've ever seen a high school teenage daughter with her mother, you've seen contempt, the rolling of the eyes, whatever, you know, kind of thing. Stonewalling. Stonewalling is emotionally withdrawing from the relationship as a way to avoid conflict. And I know women do it. Typically, men do this more, statistically, I believe. And You know, that's the interesting thing is the men sitting there with their arms crossed saying nothing and just waiting. They're waiting. If I'm quiet long enough, she's got to lose momentum at some point. and what he's doing is stonewalling, and that's not good for the relationship either. And when he's doing that, his heart rate is up at 100. He looks so calm, so cool. Heart rate's at 100. Blood oxygen concentration 95 or lower. So in stonewalling, the listener does not give the speaker the usual nonverbal signals that the listener is tracking the speaker. And the spouses may think they're trying to be neutral, but stonewalling conveys disapproval, icy distance, separation, disconnection, and or smugness. Some examples are stony silence. I've heard stories, the couple being silent for like 3 days and stuff like that, after a big argument or something. Monosyllabic mutterings, changing the subject, removing yourself physically, just walking out of the room, and the silent treatment. So now on to the 4 antidotes. So the opposite of criticism is what Dr. Gottman calls the gentle startup. To do this, you need to learn to make specific complaints and requests. So in every marriage, you have to be able to make complaints. There's going to be conflict and you need to face it. It's just that you don't use criticism to address the conflict. You learn to make a complaint versus a criticism. And the complaint looks like this. When X happened, I felt Y, and I want Z. So, when I saw, here's an example. When I saw your socks on the floor again, I felt furious. And I'd like you to pick them up and to try not to do that again. That's legitimate. That's called good communication.
That's where I'm messing up.
And then sometimes person A will communicate perfectly, just like this. But the other person goes into defensiveness. Oh well, now we're in escalation. We're not responsible for the other person's defensiveness, right? As long as we're speaking, using the gentle startup. But a little more about the gentle startup here. We don't have a because clause. It's not, you don't start explaining why you felt the way you felt. So you left the socks on the floor, and that made me furious because, and then you start telling them why. You don't need to do that because the need, when you say, I'd like you not to do that again, et cetera, kind of fills in the blanks for the other person. So Dr. Gottman says that behind every so-called negative emotion, there's a positive need. So we just leave the because out and say the need. Also, it's important not to give an interpretation when saying the event. For example, instead of saying, when I saw you mess up, you would say something more particular, like when I saw you move the red piece, or when I saw you do whatever. And you notice you're using an I statement, when I saw, rather than when you messed up. It just shifts it a little. And another part about using the gentle startup is to do conscious communication. So rather than just getting into our kind of automatic habits that we learned in our childhood, to be conscious about this stuff. And we would speak the unarguable truth and listen generously. So a lot more listening. The unarguable truth is not like, I'm God, I know the truth, and I'm telling you the truth, right? That's not the unarguable truth. The unarguable truth is using your 5 senses. So it's saying, I heard you say this. This is what I saw. I saw the socks on the floor. I actually don't know that you left them there. Maybe the dog pulled it out of the basket and put it there, right? But I did see it on the floor. That's the unarguable truth. Yeah. The next antidote, the antidote for defensiveness, is to take responsibility. And you'd be amazed in therapy with, once certain men catch on to this, they really take it over. They're good at it, you know. The most defensive of men, and I'm not saying the women don't, it's just, you know, the women kind of get relational stuff a little more, may I say. So this is an area of defensiveness that I see in the men a lot. They can really learn this, to take responsibility for their behavior. The way of taking responsibility is to validate your spouse. Let your spouse know what makes sense to you about what they're saying. Let them know you understand what they're feeling and see it through their eyes. So let's say your spouse says something, you know, it's like a minute long, and you disagree with like 50 seconds of it, but there were 10 seconds that you're like, yeah. So in your head, you're thinking, I disagree with most of that. And what comes out of your mouth is something about those 10 seconds. You know, yeah, I can see how, blah, blah, blah. And then guess what? No escalation occurs. And you can always validate the emotion. Even if you disagree with the so-called facts, you could say, yeah, I can understand feeling angry. You know, that kind of thing. And then, of course, claiming responsibility is the way to take responsibility. It's what can I learn from this? What can I do about it? So even if you're just totally angry and kind of steaming about some event that happened, and you're right? You can shift into taking responsibility and just say, well, maybe I did something here too. You know, just look for that. And just, everything in you shifts when you start doing that. And it helps the relationship. The antidote to contempt is to build a culture of appreciation. So Dr. Gottman noticed that in times of conflict, the masters had 5 positive exchanges to every 1 conflictual change, whereas the disasters, the ratio was lower. So even if it's 4 to 1, you're going to go downhill, right? You got to at least get the 5 to 1 ratio, and then in general in your marriage, you want to get up to at least like 50 to 1. You know, 20 to 1 is good, 50 to 1 is even better. So what you end up doing is catching your spouse doing something right? You know, amidst conflict, amidst when you're angry, when there's something unresolved. Don't forget about the things they're doing right, and open your mouth and actually say it. Another way to build a culture of appreciation is to rewrite your inner script, replacing thoughts of righteous indignation or innocent victimization with thoughts of appreciation and responsibility. And these thoughts can be soothing and validating. The antidote to stonewalling is to do physiological self-soothing. So, the first thing I want to differentiate here is between stonewalling and timeouts, because they sound the same. So stonewalling is just walking out of the room without saying anything, and your spouse doesn't know when you're coming back, right? And that can bring up fears of abandonment and all kinds of stuff. It just can really increase the problem. Timeouts is something where you talk about this ahead of time. Hey, I saw a therapist talk at church today, and he said we should do timeouts. I want to get your buy-in on this. You know, so what he says to do is you make a statement like, I feel angry right now, and I'm going to take a timeout. And it doesn't have to be angry. I feel sad. I feel afraid. Whatever. And I'm going to take a 20-minute timeout. And I need you to agree that's okay. And I'm going to go away for 20 minutes when I say that. And then I'll come back when I'm done. Now the thing is, if you say 20 minutes, you don't come back in 15. Even if you're feeling good, you don't come back in 15. 20 means 20. But it doesn't mean come back an hour later either, right? Because you want to build trust in the relationship. So if you say 20 minutes, you mean 20 minutes, and you come back in 20 minutes. If you're still mad in 20 minutes, you go back and you say, I need another 20, right? Something like that. But at least you're keeping your word. But big difference between that and just storming out of the room and you don't talk. And at the end of the 20 minutes, you can come back and revisit the problem if you want, or schedule it for a different time. And so what do you do during timeouts? If you're like a therapist to the core, like myself, you journal, right? But normal people will do something that they find enjoyable, like listen to music, exercise, just something to get your mind up. Watch some funny YouTube videos. It doesn't matter. Go for a walk. These kinds of things. It's just that all you have to do is get 20 minutes to pass without staying in it. If you're staying in it, you keep charging yourself up. And we're trying not to do that. Also, along the lines of doing self-soothing, you need to practice getting undefended. Easier said than done. This is allowing your partner's utterances to be what they really are. Just thoughts and puffs of air. And let go of the stories you are making up. And sort of my way of handling this or accomplishing this is to say, okay, the truth is the truth is the truth. Whatever is the truth is not going to change by anything my spouse is saying, right? So I can hear this. This can't hurt me, right? And even if I disagree with it all, I can even say, okay, so you're saying that I did this and this and this and this. Do I have it right? Yeah. Because I don't have to get defensive, right? I'm not saying I'm never defensive. I'm just telling you when I follow this advice. Right? But it's something you can do, maybe once a year you can pull this off. So, in summary, to help you remember what I've gone over today, I'd like to review the T44 mnemonic one last time. So the T, first T is for timeouts, second T is for the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The second 4 is for the 4 antidotes. For timeouts, I said that taking more time out should be the first change you make in your important relationships. For the 4 horsemen, these are the 4 relationship damaging behaviors of criticism, defense, contempt, and stonewalling. The 4 antidotes are the 4 opposing behaviors that you can do to improve your relationships. The antidote to criticism is to use the gentle startup. The antidote to defensiveness is to take responsibility. The antidote to contempt is to build a culture of appreciation. And the antidote to stonewalling is to do physiological soothing. I think that everyone in the room now has at least some basic information on how to go about improving their significant relationships. And if you want more information, I recommend reading one of Dr. John Gottman's books. It doesn't matter which one, whichever one you will read. And what I presented here today is based on science. So if you do the 4 horsemen regularly without doing any relational repairs, then you're likely to have unhappy relationships with your significant others. However, if you do the 4 antidotes, then your important relationships will likely be happy ones. It's really that simple. And while it's that simple, I think we all know that actually carrying out the 4 antidotes is a lot easier said than done. That's where I can be of service to you. So you have the concepts. I do urge you to try putting them into action today. If you're successful at it, then you're on your way. But if you have trouble in it, I want you to know there's no shame in seeking help. One famous family therapist and theorist, her name's Virginia Satir, she said that healthy families seek outside help when they need it. And I agree. I think it's a sign of health to seek outside help when you need it. So you have my contact information, so please don't hesitate to use it if you need or even just want my help. So I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. And this is the end of my talk, and I'll be taking questions on what I presented here now.
You said rewrite your inner script. You mean focus on the positive things that they do and remind yourself and remind others of that? So like when you talk with your girlfriends, instead of saying, again, he did this, whatever, you say, oh, he did whatever.
Well, it's more about to that person. So go to him and say, you did this good stuff.
But you said rewrite
your inner script, right? Yeah.
So both.
Right, sure. When you're talking to your girlfriends too. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So some people, like, I would be journaling, so I would change the way I'm journaling. But if I understand that. I guess women talk to their girlfriends. Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, so you would change that script.
Okay.
Start journaling.
Okay, yeah. So if you're arguing, getting into conflict, you need to take a break. And you need to start doing some fun stuff, have some good exchanges, like hey, I noticed you washed the car for me today. Thanks a lot for that. And try and get 5 of these in before the next conflict. Compliments and good exchanges, a little laugh together, something like that. And so you want at least 5 to 1 in times of conflict. And then when you're not in conflict, it would be good to be shooting. It's always good to be shooting for like 20 to 1 or 50 to 1. You want a higher ratio of good exchanges to bad. So when couples are having trouble, they're going conflict, and they're stuck in it, and they get into something that Dr. Gottman calls negative affect override, which means unwanted emotion override. Right? You're like, you start getting on guard and vigilant, and so your spouse says something innocuous, and you're like, what do you mean by that? And it's like, But that's because you've had so much conflict, you're just like expecting it. But when you shift it, and you start making sure you're getting out of conflict, and having less conflict and more good exchanges, then you just shift the way you're viewing your spouse.
The 5 compliments, are those done during the timeouts or at another time?
Not during the timeouts. So during the timeouts, you're definitely alone.
Okay.
So just when you're together, it's to prevent needing a timeout.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in your experience, when, like, for example, as a wife, you're giving compliments and you're really working hard to make those things, the response back from your significant other, your spouse, is that likely to happen right away? Like, how much time do you say, oh, I'm really working on this? In your head, you're telling yourself, I'm working on giving the compliments. Do you get them back? Like on the receiving end?
Right. Are you saying, okay, so if person A is trying to give compliments and person B doesn't even know about what I presented here today, how likely are you to get compliments back? Right? That's a good question. I never thought about that one.
Okay, my husband does this 4 horsemen with me every freaking day. I'm so sick of the 4 horsemen, but what it's made me do is shut my mouth before I respond, because he's going to bring up one of these 4 horsemen. So it's like, even if you're not reading the book, because my husband's reading the book and he's trying to apply everything, and I'm like, oh please, I've done that for 30 years, like now it's your turn. But it does help. It does get you to understand it. Like now I can throw back at him, that's one of the horsemen. Like you're doing it now. But it's not about that. You can start complimenting your spouse, but all that does for him, even if he doesn't give it back, it does take him off the defensive. And that gives you an open format to start a more calm, get back to a more calm conversation when the argument has gotten heated. And I do that all the time. That works, girls, like you have no idea. And when he tells me I did something wrong, I always go like this, oopsies, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, or I can understand how that makes you feel. And then he goes back to the four horsemen. Are you being condescending? Okay, you're not doing it. And I'm like, no, I'm sincere. But it does work. It does, you know, it's a practice. It's a practice.
Good. Yeah. So I could say, I can second that if you're doing all of the antidotes, it can shift the relationship a lot. When the other person starts changing, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. But we have one testimony.
What is the name of the book? You said you were reading a book?
What is the name of the book?
You can get any book from Dr. John Gottman. What did you read?
What was the first one? Something.
It's The Science of Trust. The 4 Principles of Marriage.
The 4 Principles of Marriage.
Yeah.
But I do want to tell you something. One day, I've had this notion of my husband that I've stayed firm on for over a year. And we were in the car arguing, and he went back to, well, you never this. And I'm like, do you understand that's what you do? You don't appreciate what I did for 30 years. And he went right back to the 4 Horsemen and took it out of there. And he said, you know what, you're right. And I came home and called Tony and said, you wouldn't believe this. All of a sudden, I feel differently. It happens like that. From the trip from here to Bakersfield to back home, a whole year of animosity I had towards him just drifted away, and it's because he actually just used one of the tools and said, you know what, I know I always use always, and I shouldn't, and I'm sorry I did that. And it did. It actually made a difference where I keep telling Tony, I don't know what happened. I don't know where all that animosity went. It just, because I thought it would take years to get back to a happy place, and it happened like in a car trip. And I'm still kind of like gazed by like, is this real? Do I really feel this happy about it? Because you're shocked, because you're really waiting to go back to that, okay, he's going to sting me at the end of the week. And he just keeps applying the 4 Horsemen, and I'm shocked. I haven't been stung in a month. It helps.
I have a question for you. I'm recording it. Can I leave this in there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Thanks. So, there it is.
I guess it's kind of along the same path, but if you have a spouse who is harboring resentment or anger, whether it be or not, but there's no conversation, there's no, I mean, you can't even get to any of the 4 Horsemen. Maybe subtly or whatnot, but nothing to where there's really any back and forth. So I try to employ the 4 antidotes. Would that work, even though the spouse is less than receptive or just kind of very closed off? I mean, how does that work then? Instead of feeling like it's, you know, something you've done when it's really not.
Yeah.
You know, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and some people have a personality trait, you know, where they came into the marriage like that anyway. So
Not really.
not really a
Not
change
really. It's evolved
over time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And-
So it would be important for you to take some responsibility. Okay.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, but not all.
Not all. And so, you know, the question I believe is, and let me know if I got this right, okay, that will using the 4 antidotes help if the other person's pretty closed off? And in general, it will help. There's more to Dr. John Gottman's teaching than I gave in this talk. And so, you know, there's the sound relational house, sound relationship house. That's the theory. And picture a house. What I've just given you is more, I believe, up towards the roof. It's not the foundation. And I'd have to give a whole nother talk on the house. But it's basically, you know, making sure you're having some fun together. Make sure you're spending enough time together, that you're having enough affection, that you're talking to one another about your dreams and your hopes and these kinds of things, and checking in with one another to see where you're at. So like, you think you know your spouse, but every 6 months you got to kind of ask the same questions, because you need an update on what's going on with your spouse. And Dr. Gottman calls that building love maps. So we need to work on building love maps and doing something called answering bids, which means knowing what bids for attention are, and answering them, turning towards rather than turning away. So there's a lot more than what I've given in the song, but they're in the books.
And what's that book called again?
Just any book from Dr. Gottman.
The PER relation. No, the PER relationship house or relationship.
Oh, the name of the theory is Sound Relationship House.
Oh, that's
But
just
I don't
the
think
name of
there's
the
a book.
theory. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I'm sorry. I thought
That's
it was
okay.
the name of the book.
That's a good question.
Something my husband and I do, which I guess fits into what this is, and it's simplified maybe for some people, what you're talking about is, we have emotional bank accounts. And as long as your emotional bank account's always being put in, those withdrawals aren't so bad. If you find that the withdrawals in your accounts get pretty low, you better do an awful lot to start filling that bank account back up.
So that's a good concept. Yeah. Did everyone hear that? Go ahead. Hear it. Oh, you didn't hear it. So her and her husband think of the concept of emotional bank accounts. And so if you're getting too many withdrawals from the emotional bank account, it's time to start putting some back in. And that's right on. I was going to go here and then there. Yeah. Yeah. So you can use it with everyone. Yeah.
If a person is having a problem with their spouse, and the spouse will not get help, they will not go for counseling, do you think you still recommend that the other person still gets counseling because it would help the marriage?
Right. I deal with this a lot. So the question is, if only one spouse will go to therapy and the other one won't, will it help, or do I advise the one to go to therapy? And yes, absolutely.